Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another LPA Solidarity stream. We are LP Alliance, an intercaucus coalition rebuilding the Libertarian Party and revolutionizing the liberty movement. My name is Amanda Griffiths. I'm joined by Rob Yates, and we are joined by Alex Flores, the First Nations Caucus. Alex, very good to have you. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you all doing?
Very, very good.
Good.
So the first time we spoke, or at least that I spoke with you, was maybe about a week, 2 weeks ago. And it was, Rob was talking about wanting to get First Nations affiliates, and First Nations, you're already part of the First Nations caucus. And so we learned a little bit about your history with the LP, but just give people a sense of who you are inside, outside the LP, your work with libertarianism overall.
So I started with the LP in 2012 with the first Gary Johnson presidential campaign, and from there, this thing keeps trying to time out. Sorry. From there, I worked on several like ballot initiatives, gathering signatures for different like cannabis initiatives across Western states. I also worked on the 2016 presidential campaign for Gary Johnson. Also worked on his 2018 Senate campaign. As far as like inside the party, I've held various roles at like county, state, and was also on the LNC for a while. Trying to think of what else to mention. I guess outside the party, in my personal life, I do automotive work. My business is a nonprofit called Greasy Porcupines, and it's basically an agorist automotive service where I basically help people in need to get their cars fixed. And we do trade exchange or
You're on your side a little bit. Not a little bit, a lot bit.
There we go. Sorry.
There you go.
Stuff here. Okay.
You're fine.
But yeah, it's basically a nonprofit where I help people get their cars fixed, and they can either pay it forward or donate to somebody else in need. I've been doing that for about 5 years now, or 6 years, right? Yeah, going on 6 years now. I also own a smoke shop, so yeah, stay pretty busy, but that's life for me.
So you're telling us your history, and you do have kind of an interesting political backstory. Without going into too much detail, you have essentially fought for liberty from the beginning, and you've looked for it through whatever vehicle you can. And we reached out hoping you could put some of those efforts back into working for it through the Libertarian Party to the largest extent possible that it can function, moving liberty forward in the political arena as a political party. The part of your story that I personally found the most compelling, and we just met a couple weeks ago, but talking about your specific work with some of the either Native people or people in that sphere who have also been working for liberty and some of the things they were doing. You want to talk about just what the history was there? Because we're trying to get back to some of that.
Yeah, so a lot of that started for me, related to the LP, started in 2018 when I was working for Gary Johnson's Senate campaign in New Mexico. I spent a lot of time, doing different work with different tribes in the area, and I was basically assigned to like the northwestern part of New Mexico, which is basically like outside of Farmington is all reservations. And so, there's like Chaco Canyon, which is a really like sacred historical site there. Anybody who looks in archaeology would know something about that. But there's a lot of Native American culture and heritage that I interacted with through that and through my own heritage. Through my own heritage. relationships with different people, different groups. I started working with different groups in 2020 to help with like the Navajo Waters Project to help people get running water and electricity in their homes, which in 2020 it was like 1 in 3 houses in the Navajo reservation didn't have running water or electricity, and so that number drastically improved since then through those efforts. I was able to help with that in a very small way. I feel like, but we also did like donations for like food boxes and things like that for people who couldn't get to stores and things like that, people who were just in need. And that work's kind of continued on to now. More recently, I've been working with reviving different chapters of the American Indian movement around the country. And we've worked with different tribes. Like there's a couple of tribes, and I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the names right now, but I want to say that a couple of Sioux tribes that were have canceled their contracts with ICE and are no longer cooperating with ICE on a federal level, just through some of the work that we've been able to do. So just kind of spreading out that direction and really trying to push for sovereignty, recognizing native sovereignty.
And it's I was bragging to you a little bit because, and I'm still bragging about this, but North Carolina remains the only state that had a reservation that at any point has also had a libertarian affiliate with the Eastern Band of Cherokee. But some of the stuff I'm hoping to get into, and Amanda, take it any direction you want, but Alex, what we're talking about is like a lot of libertarian principles obviously clearly came from Enlightenment philosophy, some of the US founding documents, but also from a whole bunch of the native discussion and literature and philosophy that was coming out of native cultures at that time. I think one thing that we really fail in our discourse about the native tribes that were here is like it's not like there were like the Indians and then there's just one monolithic group. It was a whole lot of tribes with a whole bunch of diverse philosophies, and there were certainly some shared sentiments. A lot of the religious stuff had some carryover, but could you go into that a little bit more, like how some of those original philosophies have driven modern libertarian thought?
So it's interesting. A lot of libertarians will point to like founding fathers, and there's like a lot of constitutionally based libertarians that will point to those like founding ideas of liberty. The separation of powers that are enshrined in our founding documents in the American Constitution. And a lot of people don't realize that even like the U.S. Congress recognized back in 1988 that a lot of the inspiration for that separation of powers and the emphasis on liberty come from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, or the Iroquois Confederacy. When you look at Montesquieu's writings, his writings were heavily influenced by what he learned from that and from the Law of Peace, which was basically the overarching government for the tribes of the East Coast of the Americas, like the first tribes that the colonized, the colonials were encountering when they were first setting up shop on the East Coast. Most of those tribes, 5 of the major tribes that operated under the Great Law of Peace and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
And present.
Yeah, it's a great talking point for libertarians if they would acknowledge it, because it, people will say that, libertarian government has never been tried, or, it's just a great philosophy or it's a fantasy idea, when really the American continent really largely operated under libertarian government for thousands of years before European colonists came over from Europe. So, we have those things to point to that we can say that, like, under the Great Law of Peace, it was open borders. It was you were allowed to come and go as you please, live how you wanted to live, as long as you were peaceful. There were certain tribes that even would accept you as their own, you could go and live amongst them and become part of the tribe, even if you weren't, blood related, because of the philosophy that they were governed under.
And so you have in your in your name tag, you are part of the First Nations caucus. My sense is that it's gotten smaller since a few events have transpired in the Libertarian Party. But what is the First Nations caucus, and where would you like to be with that?
So I started the First Nations caucus. I would say, I don't remember what year that was. I want to say it was 2021. And it was basically a way. The sole purpose of the First Nations caucus was to establish First Nations affiliates within the LP, and that would basically be affiliates that are like state level, as far as like their delegates going to a national convention and things like that. But they would be separate from the states that they reside within. So, like, the Navajo reservations would have their own affiliate, like the Cherokee reservation have their own affiliate, the Apache. All of these would have.
I love the occasional just like flipping on the side. I don't know. It keeps it interesting.
It's kind of funny. But yeah, so the goal of that was to eventually set it up to where um, those different reservations could um, establish their own affiliates, send their own delegates to the national convention, which has never been done before. So, we had the Cherokee affiliate, but I'm not aware of whether or not they had a delegation that went to a national convention or if they were recognized at that level or how that went. But you telling me about it was actually the first I'd heard of it. But that would be the goal, and through that, the Libertarian Party would be making history by doing something that even like Democrats don't do. Democrats tend to give a lot of lip service to Native issues, but um, they don't really give any like true effort to sovereignty or recognizing or honoring treaties that have been set aside or broken for hundreds of years. So, um, this gives the Libertarian Party has never been done before, and opens the door so that it can be done in other parties. There are 570 federally recognized tribes in the United States, and so when you start getting to giving those tribes the federal recognition that they've been promised, a lot of those tribes were promised you know, recognition or representation in Congress that they never received. It wasn't until like a couple of years ago that there were a couple of tribes that finally received. I believe it was like one representative, a non-voting representative to Congress, and so there's a lot of ground to be gained there, and um, I feel like it's the right thing to do, and I feel like people would be hard pressed to argue against it. Um, in the sense that like we're just righting some wrongs that have been historically wrong for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, in terms of the at least ostensible spirit of a representative government in the United States of America, what's more representative than that? Like, feels like a no-brainer in that regard.
Yeah, and I feel like the Libertarian Party has had several opportunities throughout its history to bring the American Indian movement like to be a core base within the party, and like '88, I feel like was a really solid opportunity for the LP that we missed when the LP chose Ron Paul over Russell Means. The American Indian movement kind of separated from the LP at that point, and it kind of faded away. It's kind of reviving now, but we have a real opportunity to, like, if we can set the groundwork, we can give a vehicle for that sovereignty to be recognized. you know, for a vehicle for us to go on that road and make that happen.
So I actually think that's a crucial point. Can you expand on that a little bit? So like I can talk at reasonable length sort of about overarching sentiment in like Appalachia, some of the people in North Carolina, certainly the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic area, but you run in these circles.
Mm-hmm.
What is the sentiment right now? Like what is the feeling? What are people looking for?
So I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, it's pretty mixed. You know, there's a lot of dependency on the federal infrastructure that's been kind of made. It's like it creates a dependency. I feel, but there's a lot of um, fear in disturbing that. But also there's a sentiment of wanting the sovereignty recognized. There have been many people that I've talked to that are business owners that like are tired of the red tape that they have to go through with the BIA when it comes to doing stuff on their own land, because um, you know federal there's federal guidelines that govern what they can do pretty much anywhere on the reservation. The law enforcement isn't really their own anymore. It's overseen by the BIA, and there are so many things that I feel like um, there's a dependency on the government now, but there's a yearning to want to separate from that, especially with the current circumstances of what's going on. And then you also have like reservations, like the Navajo Reservation, for example, has been fighting against uranium mining for quite some time. It's something that's like been thrown around back and forth, and it's an issue that Democrats give lip service to, but ultimately like have been allowing it to happen. Um, it happened during the first Trump administration that they reopened uranium mines that are like within like protected land of like the Grand Canyon and different tribal lands in Arizona, and then they tried to basically the Navajo Reservation outlawed transportation of uranium on their land, and different companies either through the Trump administration or the Biden administration both saw their way around those bans to the point that like there was a whole thing during the Biden administration where they were talking about confiscating trucks and like it became a big deal. Then all of these promises made to um, recognize. I don't know. It's like it's basically like a repeating pattern that's gone on for hundreds of years. There's all these promises made. It's even put down in paper sometimes. Only to just have those promises completely broken. You look at Chaco Canyon, and there was part of the agreements to allow drilling on the reservation in the area was to put a 10-mile perimeter around Chaco Canyon that couldn't be drilled in. And they've already breached that barrier several times. Like they're now drilling within Chaco Canyon. So, like there's just like the lack of respect for historical sites. There's, I feel like there are many issues that tribes would benefit from governing themselves versus the federal oversight that they have now.
Talk a little bit about the refusal to acknowledge ICE. So you mentioned that at the very beginning, that there are many tribes that are refusing now to cooperate with ICE. What's that doing? What kind of dynamics is that producing?
Well, there's a couple of tribes right now, and they're in the Midwest that have basically they had contracts to where they had detention facilities that they were basically maintaining for ICE on their land, so that they were assisting in like they had different cooperation agreements with ICE and DHS, for like housing immigrants and for processing and things like that. A couple of these tribes in the Midwest have basically canceled their contracts, where they said that they don't want the federal money anymore. They don't want to cooperate with DHS anymore. That it's creating like a hostile environment for their people, and so they, no, they're no longer maintaining these facilities. And basically there's no cooperation agreement there anymore. They severed their agreements. I know it's drawn criticism from the Trump administration. Of course, anything you do against the regime is going to do that. But on the other side of it, I think, at least I feel like it's giving a lot of other groups courage to stand up to this and say that, like, like the most that they can threaten with is cutting the federal funding, which, when if people recognized it for what it was, they would see that that's actually a gift that they're being offered. But
yeah,
I'm hoping that it's turning the tide to give more tribes courage, and that's the push that we're on with the American Indian movement right now. There's actually groups that we've worked with that are on the ground right now in Minnesota that are taking part in the protest. You've probably seen some clips of the videos online. I've seen several of them, and it always makes me really proud. But doing different tribal dances and things like that in protest in front of ICE facilities and things like that. And so, there's a heavy Native presence in Minnesota. So it's encouraging. I just hope that that momentum keeps going and that it doesn't get co-opted by one of these statist groups.
yeah. Well, and that's always the fear, right? Like, I mean, we've talked about that a lot on these streams, and how there are a lot of people that are eager to exploit this in order to just like get a different type of statism. And that's why it's very important that people who are dedicated to and committed to liberty and libertarianism are out there and out in front, because that's a serious risk.
Yeah, it's happened. It's something that it seems like the Democrats do pretty often.
Yeah.
Co-opting the Native American message. There's a lot of like inner dealings within the. I started out with the Democrats before I was ever a libertarian, and there's a lot of like inner dealings in the DNC when it comes to how like Democratic senators and congressmen work with different tribal representatives. Like the whole reason that they're drilling in Chaco Canyon was because of a deal that Martin Heinrich made with certain members of the Navajo. I'm drawing it. I'm thinking it right now. But different representatives from the Navajo Nation. And so through that, they were able to like sidestep different agreements that were made that were supposed to protect sacred sites.
Those sort of inner dealings, were you able to see those up close then with your time with the Democrats?
It's more that so like other parties are much more. I don't know. Like I've worked in all the parties, and I would say that there's a certain level of like corruption that kind of happens in all of them. But with the major parties, there's just one layer to it, right? And so, I don't necessarily see it like firsthand, but you see the effects of it, and we see the promises that were made by these Democratic senators in order to get reelected, and then once they're back in office and not facing reelection, then those deals kind of just fall to the wayside. And that's what happened with that Chaco Canyon deal, was that those lands are supposed to be protected, but once Martin Heinrich won the election, and this is back in 2018, once he won re-election, um, the drilling continued, the encroachment on Chaco Canyon continued. There's different sites in New Mexico that are now being threatened by different corporations, and so um, there's a lot of that co-oping happening where it's just like, oh, we're gonna do this, and then they just it's they're just lip service for your vote. And,
Isn't that always the case though? Like we're sold this narrative that at some level the existential battle, if you will, is between like corporations and the government. And like the evil corporations are out to screw people, and without the government, we can't protect the little guy. When the truth is, business and commerce, free trade between free people is a wonderful thing, and there's no difference between corporations and the government.
it makes me think of the term controlled opposition, right? Like it's they the fight basically keeps everybody else engaged, but really they're getting along the whole time and cooperating and using that that partisanship to drive support and like drive funds and control narratives.
Drive elections, yeah. And then you're telling me the government lied, like surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
It's something I reflect on, looking at sort of the history of Native people and the U.S. government, and not. I hate making distinctions. People are people, but there's a clear conflict that has arisen many times there. But you talked about the treaties, and it's like that's a contract. They just broke the contract, no accountability. Like just honoring the treaties would have gone such a long way. There's so many flashpoints along this history that one different decision could have gone such a long way to not put us here. But because they've never been held accountable, they just continue to break agreements.
Well, it's interesting because like on one side of it, you see like there's arguments to be made back and forth. Like I've heard people argue that certain tribes didn't hold up their end of the agreement, and that's why their land was taken over or whatever. Like when you look into the history of how these agreements were made in the first place, like it's where you start getting into the like where people talk about stolen land. A lot of times, a member of a tribe would be kidnapped, and they were forced to sign a document that made them the representative of all of their people, and they're not a chief or any. They're just somebody that happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And there are several agreements like that, and it's like a history of hundreds of broken treaties. But then you look at the other side of it, and like tribes right now, like you would think that tribes would have every reason to be like outraged and uprising and totally just revolting against the government who's never got to one thing. But the response is still the doctrine of enduring, and for Native Americans, it's we still honor our principles and we still stand by who we are as people, and it's we don't want to cause violence. We still want the treaties to just be upheld. And so I think it says something, to like whether or not you want to argue about who did what in the past, like who's doing what now, like the U.S. government is still not honoring hundreds of these contracts, and they continue to make contracts and not uphold them. And meanwhile, Native American tribes haven't uprisen. They're not like revolting. They're not, like seceding from the U.S. They're just saying, hey, honor your promises.
Just once.
Yeah, it'd be great.
What are some issues that and you talked a little bit about this, but what are some issues that you would like to see a Libertarian Party that includes First Nations affiliates focusing on?
I mean, it's something that's really in the founding principles of the party. Like when the Libertarian Party talks about individual liberty and sovereignty and like self-ownership, That's all that most tribes have ever wanted to do was own themselves and govern themselves, live how they want to live undisturbed. And we don't see ourselves as like owners of the land. We see ourselves as caretakers of the land. And through that perspective, um, I think that the LP, through its principles, has an opportunity to really put a spotlight on that and show that um, that there are really good solid intentions, and that it's something that people can really get behind. I'd like to see the LP, I don't know, it's like if the LP could stick to its identity and really recognize that as much as some people may not want to, that some of the left roots of the party, and understand that a lot of these groups have the same mindset that we do, and they just want freedom, and we can be a real beacon for that in ways that the party just can't.
There is an allergy, I think, to acknowledging the sort of holistic network of libertarian theory, right? Is we only want to focus on Rothbard, like a particular era of Rothbard, and there's so much more, right? We only want to focus on the Austrian school, or we only want to focus on American libertarianism, when American libertarianism, if we just focus on it, we don't focus on all the traditions that inform it, is a very narrow school of libertarianism indeed, and very, very time bounded. So it is really interesting, at least to me, to hear about the ways that libertarianism has pervaded across cultures and across other schools of thought. I'm more familiar with European libertarianism, not as much, and Rob might argue more like Central Eastern European libertarianism, not as much Native American libertarianism and what we would call today Native American libertarianism. There's so much of the tradition that we are missing, I think, by only focusing on this narrow subset.
Yeah,
It really does come down to what you're saying out there. It's freedom, ultimately. A lot of these flavors of libertarianism, if people were allowed to be free and truly self-determine and organize, I think you'd see a lot of different things manifest. Because one of the cool things about our philosophy that ignores all the others is people are different. We acknowledge that. And we're not trying to force anyone into one bucket. We're just asking that they not try to force us into it as well. You'd probably find me on a beach somewhere.
What?
yeah. I was having a conversation with my kids a couple days ago, and we were talking about how all these buzzwords that have been made into all these political buzzwords that have been made into bad words, and and I was explaining to my daughter what a thought terminating cliche was, and we were just having discussions about how somebody can use the term socialist, communist, or something like that as a thought terminating cliche, and it's what really they're just refusing to dive deeper when I don't know, like I said, libertarian it was the government that was on this continent before it was America, back when it was still an island, was basically libertarian society lived very what we would consider socialist, right? But you say the word socialist now, and people automatically are allergic to it, it's a bad word, and it's no, the thing that you're thinking of that's a bad thing is totalitarian socialism, with these governments that want control of everything, and this is not the same thing. This is where people have the control of it, not the government. We talked about communism, for example, is a terrible, dirty word, and they had a terrible witch hunt through America's history where they were putting people on trial for being communists. When really the thing that they were scared of was Soviet Union communism, or like Chinese communism, like where the government was in totalitarian control of society, not like a hippie commune.
Well,
Like
yeah.
a hippie commune is very much a libertarian thing, but it's like you can't call it communist because people freak out about the word. But it is communism. It's just I don't know. Anyway,
It's this. No, I mean, I completely agree, and I talk about this way too much, so it's fantastic. Thank you for giving me an excuse to do it. It's this trick that the the Russian revolutionary left, part of them got into power, not all of them, and then still had to be leftists, right? So all of a sudden, we take this Marxian economic axis and we say, okay, right and left are here now. That's the left is here on this economic axis, the right is here on this economic axis, and it's just contrived, it's invented. We took one dimension and said that's how we're going to define right and left now, and it's utterly meaningless. This is a contrivance of statists who wanted so badly to continue calling themselves leftists while still remaining in power and doing terrible totalitarian things. And unfortunately, everyone lapped it up, right? Like the West lapped it up because the totalitarian statists in the Soviet Union were awful. And so they were very, very happy to have a way to distinguish themselves. Other totalitarian statists who were more like Marxist-Leninists also lapped it up because they liked being the definition of leftism, although it's completely fake. It's totalitarianism. So yeah, I agree with you. There's a weird allergy to other types of, other schools rather, of the notion that people are self-authors, people are self-owners. And like, there isn't just one. There isn't just the one that we know in the American Libertarian Party.
I think there's because very well, I don't love the term socialism or communism at all, but a lot of that has to do with the connotations, not what y'all are talking about. But I think that the fight, the ideological fight over this, and similar to the people who are anti-capitalist, when to me capitalism just means the free exchange of goods between people. I understand there's like the Marxist definition that now you're looking at an economy based on the flow of capital, and that's where you get, like, when you say crony capitalism, to me crony capitalism can't exist, but people who have that ideological argument would point to crony capitalism going on today. But the real compounding factor is the involvement of the government in any of it, the involvement of the state trying to control where this stuff goes, as opposed to people voluntarily making the decisions. Because when you look at something like a voluntary commune, it can work extraordinarily well on a small level, and not everyone is looking for $1 billion mansion or some huge material gain. Some people are just seeking spiritual enlightenment. If you look at religious traditions, a lot of monks live in a situation that is very much a commune, very communist. The original disciples of Jesus were about as socialist as you can be on paper. And what was Jesus' act? It was to flip over the money changers table, It's always the involvement of the government, the attempt to control, that leads to these things falling apart. And then if they're allowed to go on their own, maybe they'll work, maybe they won't, and people will find out and we can move on. But right now there's a whole lot we don't know because we've just never had a chance to let it thrive or fail on its own.
And
so what's up? Oh, go ahead, Rena.
No, go on. You go.
Well, I was going to say, let's talk next steps. What's next? We've discussed this offline a little bit, but what and what you were talking about, I support fully in every way as an individual libertarian, as someone running for chair, as a member of LPA Allies. What would you like to see from the party and its outreach and work with the tribes?
So as far as like outreach with the tribes, I see, a lot of it is really, I feel like there's a lot of rebuilding happening with the party right now, and I feel like as that happens, that we'll have more people to do that kind of stuff. there's people to do that kind of outreach that we're looking for, that will be able, that will see the growth that I would hope to see. I think the next steps right now, the group that I was originally working with in 22, they left when they felt like bigotry was something that was being welcomed into the party. And so I feel like part of the struggle there is going to be for the party to find its identity. And I brought this up to, I think it was Kyle at one point, but that the LP really needs to find and stick to its identity, so that we stop having these back and forth tug of war takeover style things that are happening every decade that completely derail any progress that happens. The takeover in 22 wasn't the first one. So it's something that I feel like is going to keep happening as long as libertarians can't agree on a basis of what being a libertarian is. And I see that argument online all the time, and I've seen it. I participated in the party for well over 15 years, and I saw the argument constantly. You're not a real libertarian, because they express some thought that isn't quite there yet. And I think we can eliminate a lot of that by firmly defining hey, there are certain things, there are things that we can discuss and debate on or whatever, but when it comes to certain core principles like self-ownership, freedom of movement, bodily autonomy, certain things that all libertarians should be able to agree on, if we can identify as that and find a way to make that make that shine, it'll separate us from the other parties and give us an identity that people can align with more and see themselves with. And from there we can have the discussions of getting into various libertarian thought of do you like Canadian economics or Austrian or what, we can go into those discussions, but we've got to be able to agree on some basic things. And it felt like over the last few years, it was even in 22, by removing the bigotry language from the platform, or from the platform, I get the intention, but what it signaled was that hey, we're okay with this kind of behavior, and we should be able to recognize as libertarians that bigotry is contrary to libertarianism. You can't treat there's not really a way to treat people like that and still conduct yourself as a libertarian. There's just you run into communism.
Yeah, it's counter to the principle of self-ownership. And I think what you're highlighting is, yes, a need to do more intellectual education as a party, right? To take seriously our obligation to tell people what libertarianism is about, not only through policy objectives, which are fungible. And he dropped out. I can keep talking.
Yeah, let's keep going. He'll be back, but
not only through policy objectives that are fungible, but also through having a publication or multiple publications that talk about various types of libertarianism, principles of libertarianism.
I also think Alex made a good point. If we are going to continue to just fight with each other over this manufactured right-left philosophical dichotomy, then a lot of people who, welcome back,
Hello.
I was agreeing with your statement about the constant battles between the parties, because I was saying if we continue to battle in the party over a right-left dichotomy that's been manufactured by the uniparty to split people, then those who might be otherwise inclined to join the party or join the liberty movement are going to continue to be discouraged or driven away, because if we're fighting the same way they are and they're power brokers and we're getting caught up in this power broker battle as opposed to returning power to the people, then why would they come to the place where there's less power? If it's a battle for power, you want to go with the ones that have power. If it's a battle to return power, all of a sudden we have something inviting. I think one of the most important things we can do is sort of say, we're all libertarian. We're all on this battle for liberty. And no matter how much I might disagree with someone else philosophically here, that's irrelevant at this point. Like, I want to give your ideas a chance to thrive or fail on their own, and I want mine to do the same. And that's really all we're asking for.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, I think you dropped out right when I was saying it, but I do think that there's a huge role for like theoretical philosophical education to play here, because we go back and forth on policy issues, which are always fungible. We don't talk enough as a party. We don't do enough messaging or education on, like you said, what libertarianism is. And if we're able to do that as a party, then we already have developed more of a sense of cohesion by being able to put out literature and statements that say, this is what libertarianism is, this is what libertarianism is about, and always coming from first principles in policy statements and things like that. So I agree with you. I think that's correct. And it would be fantastic to have First Nations affiliates. There is an issue, I think, with having the right people doing outreach in that respect. And that's why we were really happy to be able to talk with you, because you've done that leadership already. But I would be very excited to have us moving in this direction as a party, because I really can't think of a much better, set of individuals to represent these very, very fundamental ideas.
Yeah, it's funny. I never envisioned myself as being any kind of like a leader or like somebody who like would take up this kind of charge where nobody was doing it. But I've always just kind of felt like, I don't know, I've seen like, there's like a, trying to think of the video. There's like a video online where like this, like, there's like a Ferris wheel or something that's like out of control and it's like going crazy and it looks like it's about to tip over. And like one guy runs over and just starts holding on to it. And like he looks ridiculous at first by himself, he's like just this one dude doing it by himself. And then gradually like more and more people start joining him. And by the time, like within a couple of minutes, there's at least 30 people there trying to hold this thing down and actually stabilizing it to the point that they can stop it and help people and actually get people off of it. And so, I don't, I see myself as that person. Like I may not be, have it all like completely figured out as like how it's going to go. I just hoping that like by me taking these steps forward, that other people who are on that same track will come forward and help me with this and, bring this, this vision forward so that we can see some real freedom for people.
It's like the Mighty Mighty Bosstones song where he says, "I'm not a coward. I've just never been tested." Like sometimes you don't know what you have into until you're forced to step up. But when you got to step up, you got to step up. I think about what's the Kurt Vonnegut novella? Is it Time Warp? Is that what it's called? Where everything goes backwards for 7 years and then all of a sudden starts moving forward and no one knows what to do. And the one guy is just going up to people like, "You were sick, but now you're better. Like, start moving." Those little acts go so far. But to me, that's leadership. Like anyone who wants to be a leader, okay, maybe, but you should be skeptical of that desire.
Well, I think everyone should want to be a leader. I'll let you finish. I'll let you finish and then I'll cut it.
Well, it's people should want to lead in that they lead themselves and then the example carries through. But if your goal is to lead people as opposed to achieving something, then I would be skeptical of your motives.
I guess the one tweak that I would have to that is that I don't agree with when people are like, oh, the person who should have the power is the person who doesn't want that power. No, that's not true, because then the person won't do anything and be very confrontation averse, and we don't want that.
True.
But so there, I believe in returning power to people, but I also believe that people should, and I think you kind of got toward it earlier where you were talking about, wanting to mobilize others in a cause. There should be at least enough of a desire to lead toward something rather than leading for oneself. It's leading for a cause and toward a cause.
So, touching on my heritage a little bit, my great uncle is Geronimo, and so most people are familiar with that name of like Geronimo and Native history and who he was as a leader for the Apaches. But a lot of people don't really know about his history and like how he became a leader. Geronimo actually wasn't a hereditary chief. Geronimo basically was thrust into the fight when his family was killed. And so there's a quote in his book that his biography that was written just before he died, where he says that I was no chief and never had been, but because I had been wronged more than others, this honor was conferred upon me, and so I strived to prove worthy of the trust. Where he basically was elevated to a level because of what had happened to him and because of the drive that it gave him to like right those wrongs, and that's what made him into the fierce leader that he was. And so like you were saying, like I think I don't know, I have beliefs about like I don't believe in coincidences, and so I believe that like people are put in positions for a reason to bring things forward. So
I guess it's a matter of recognizing it and stepping up when it's called upon.
yeah.
We are just under an hour, so I think this is probably about a good time to wrap as any. Alex, thank you so much. I hope to be talking with you a lot more, talking with you and Rob a lot more about getting these affiliates set up and doing some cool activism work. So thank you so much for being on here.
And I'll just say this, I hope it works. I would be so proud of our party if we could do that.
Yeah.
And really, because that, you know what, I've said this before, like at its core, I love this country. I love the ideals it was built on. And like, what is more true to the ideals this country ostensibly stands for than bringing back in the people who helped found it in so many ways at such a fundamental level?
We have a real chance to make history as a party, but also recognize sovereignty for people and like stay true to our founding, like in our platform, in the statement of principles. It's we believe in we strive to set the world free in our lifetime, and this is a real opportunity to set a huge portion of the world free, like in a way that's never been done.
Amen.
Again, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. And we are back on Thursday night with the business list. We will see you then. Thanks again, Alex. And good night, everyone. I need to minimize this so that I can end the show. Look at that. And we'll wait. Good night, everyone.